Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for visiting us here in Sydney, and thank you so much for coming onto this show one-on-one, where we try and get to meet senior Vaishnavas and sort of figure out what makes them click. First of all, I'd like to welcome you again to Sydney. We're all very happy to have you here, and we've very much appreciated the classes that you've been giving us. Just for the insight of the devotees who don't know, could you maybe share with us who you were before you joined Krishna consciousness and the way in which you did join?
I was born in Northern Ireland and educated there. I left there after completing my A-levels in 1968. A month or so after leaving, the troubles began, which lasted for 30 years. And my parents moved away from there to Oxford in England. A couple of years later, I was supposed to go to university after a gap year, but I just continued traveling for a few years. When I returned to UK in 1971, I again got a place in the university in St Andrews in Scotland. But before going to university, I met the devotees in August 71 and came to the temple in London, where I saw Srila Prabhupada lecture on the first day. Visited again after a couple of days and heard him again, and then I was invited to join the temple. So since then I've been in ISKCON. I was initiated, first initiation in Paris, December 1971, and second initiation at Rath Yatra in London in July 1972. Srila Prabhupada personally gave the mantra at the temple after Rath Yatra.
And around what age would you have been at that time?
20 years old.
20 years old. So then we've seen then, since then, you've committed your whole life to fulfilling Srila Prabhupada's desires within his mission and helping to propagate his movement. That's a lot of surrender, if you will. How would you say we should best cultivate that among the current 21-year-olds?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I was almost 21 when I joined. ISKCON's changed a lot, of course, and I think the current policies of, making interested persons visit the temple regularly for some time before they actually decide to move in is better. And also that they study a little bit what is ISKCON, what is the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, so they're sure that they really want to move into the temple, or if they're not ready to move into the temple, then they can visit regularly or participate in outreach programs.
Yeah, and then among those who've already joined, what would be a way that you'd find to encourage them to, say, intensify their enthusiasm for the movement?
Well, I think regular participation in different ISKCON programs, study of Srila Prabhupada's books, association of experienced devotees, and especially encourage them to chant Hare Krishna, participate in kirtans, and chant japa as attentively as possible, as chanting Hare Krishna is a central activity of the Krishna consciousness movement. So We want to encourage people to chant and develop a taste for chanting. But the books, Prabhupada's books, are very important to understand Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy properly.
You mentioned just a little bit earlier about how you've seen ISKCON sort of changed. What sort of changes would you particularly note?
Well, not so many young people are ready to just give up everything and move into the ashram. And those days, of course, very few devotees were married. Nowadays, most devotees are married, so it's quite a different lifestyle. In many ways, movement, has become more mature. The senior devotees are a lot more experienced in guiding newer members, and we have many more educational courses. So many things have changed, improved. Although there may be, less young people joining the ashram, so it might not be, or in many places there isn't the same youthful vigor. But still, that's all right. It's ISKCON, it's a big movement, and the opportunities are still there for those who wish to join the ashram, or there are plenty of opportunities for those who are grihastas and live at home.
Yeah. So that's really interesting how you focused on the improvements. Are there any areas in the changing ISKCON world that you'd say maybe you'd have a more cautious tone towards rather than appreciative, or maybe some pitfalls that we could potentially fall in as we go through these changes?
That's maybe a difficult question for me to answer. I'm not there to judge how different temples and different senior Vaishnavas are, conducting their programs.
Yeah, maybe generally in as we're seeing the generational changes, not so much with specific programs, but more in the general shift in culture altogether, which sort of cautions would you have for the people coming in with the new challenges that they'll be facing with the change?
Well, mainly I think that they should be very aware of, as much as possible, about Krishna consciousness and the Krishna conscious lifestyle, so that they do associate plenty with the devotees, especially if before committing themselves to initiation and or living in the ashram. Because there have been, quite a number of people who are disappointed after giving a lot of their life's energy, youthful energy, to ISKCON while unmarried, and then after they get married, they find it's too late for them to get an education or a good job. So, yeah, I think, we would advise people to be cautious, but at the same time we want to encourage them in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. So then with interacting with that new sort of generation, what sort of changes have you observed in terms of their expectations and outlook and practices?
Well, again, I'm not really studying very closely the next generation. Maybe I should be, but I can't say that I am doing it. I'm somewhat of a pioneer, and like to go to new places and just try to start up Krishna conscious movement in different places. It was something Prabhupada requested me to do. So there are other senior Vaishnavas who are very much more focused on how to bring up the next generation of Vaishnavas. I mean, I like to keep things simple, chant Hare Krishna, be happy, and go to classes and worship the deities, etc. But by and large, it's very encouraging to see next generation and generation after that coming up nicely, many of them in Krishna consciousness. There are many very nice examples of good devotees among them.
So then, in those pioneering days, sort of experiences that you mentioned, are there any that particularly stand out for you, that have held a special place in your heart, if you will?
Well, many.
Yeah?
Many, yeah. But particularly going to new countries in Asia, where I spent 30-35 years working, starting from scratch, bringing devotees and collecting funds to develop, different places: Bangladesh, Nepal, Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, those countries in particular, and also some parts of North India, and also having the opportunity to preach regularly in Russia, the previous Soviet Union and Russia, starting from 1986, where I've been a regular visitor to there every year since then. So those were particularly challenging adventures.
What were some of those challenges, and how did you sort of get past them?
Well, especially governments of some countries, in Soviet Union they weren't very favorable. We got chased around by the KGB quite a few times in different parts of the former Soviet Union. Somehow we always managed to escape and do the programs. And in other countries also, like Burma, Myanmar now it's called, Bangladesh, the authorities were not very favorable in the beginning, but somehow we could keep under the radar and manage to help ISKCON grow and expand, and is ISKCON quite a large movement in those countries now, especially in Bangladesh. And it was also wonderful to have the opportunity to develop ISKCON temples in a number of holy places connected with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like the birthplaces of Pundrik Vijayanidhi, Rup Sanatan Goswamis, Advaita Acharya. Now I've heard they've acquired land at Narottam Das Thakur's birthplace and begun the construction of a temple and ashram there. So I always feel that that's a valuable service for the movement, for the Vaishnavas in general.
Yeah, so then, as you mentioned, the Bangladesh plant has sort of grown up. would you say there's any areas in pioneering that are sort of have been either overlooked or need looking at now? Like if there's any specific areas of the world we should focus on establishing, or maybe if there's some places that the movement has started to take plant in, but we need to put a bit more emphasis into helping flourish?
Well, yes, I'm currently involved in preaching in Thailand, which among all those countries has been the slowest one to develop, probably because of the Hindu population is much smaller. But it's a big country. There's a lot of service, a lot of work to be done to expand the Krishna consciousness movement, and also in neighboring countries, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. Not much there at present, but big populations, so I think there's plenty to do.
Yeah. And so with starting up a new sort of plant, a new center, what sort of advice would you give to, say, someone who's up and coming and sort of trying to establish preaching in an area with not too much of an existent ISKCON community?
You have to persevere. Don't give up through thick and thin. And you have to try to keep stability of leadership. Well, that's relevant not only in new places, but in countries like Australia also. If there's too much changing of a leadership, then it's hard to maintain the trust of the devotees. And especially if there's dispute between the senior devotees, then it tends to make others lose their faith and go away. So stability of the leadership is very important. So yeah, stick at it, persevere, and keep calm, keep chanting Hare Krishna and following the program that Srila Prabhupada laid out for us. If we do that, then there'll be success. Whether it's rapid or slow expansion, there'll be success.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing. That's inspiring. I was just wondering if there's any projects coming up that you're invested in, either personally or have just been following in the future, that you'd like to share or point to?
You mean that I'm personally involved in?
Yeah, or one that you find is rather important.
Well, I don't know important or not, but I'm trying to develop preaching in Chiang Mai and north of Thailand, and gradually would like to see it. We're already having some success. We had our second Rath Yatra a few weeks back, and it was very well received. And we have a center there, and more people are taking interest in Krishna consciousness. So I'm somewhat focused on trying to help that project, and also preach in other parts of Thailand. And just yesterday, the devotee who's helping me in Chiang Mai, he mentioned he's going to go to Laos soon, as he has some contacts there. There hasn't been any preaching of Krishna consciousness there, so I'd like to encourage that. Apart from that, I regularly visit Russia and some of the other ex-Soviet countries nearby, and I'll continue to do that, at least as health permits.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. Just one last thing, if you could share a message to all of ISKCON Sydney and ISKCON in general, just as a general message for everyone to hear, that you feel would be important.
Well, I'd like to thank devotees of ISKCON Sydney for their hospitality, and also devotees of other centres that I visited so far in Australia, Melbourne, New Govardhan, Brisbane. Of course, I spent many years involved in this yatra, about 25 years. So I know the leaders and the devotees, many of the devotees well. I haven't been for 5 years, but it's been a great pleasure to visit, and nice to see that, you know, things are going on steadily, and in some areas very good expansion. New Govardhan in particular seems to be growing in leaps and bounds, and Melbourne Temple also powering along. So I thank all of you, and if Krishna permits, may again visit in the future.
So, well, we highly anticipate it. Thank you so much for joining us again, and safe travels.
Thank you very much. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy, and follow the instructions given in Srila Prabhupada's books, and always keep the association of the Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.